courtroom was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the rustle of papers and the faint murmur of distant voices. It was a late morning, the light streaming through the high windows casting a warm, golden hue across the rows of wooden benches. The walls of the courtroom felt imposing, yet comforting, the sort of space where lives were judged, but often with a certain gravity, a gentleness reserved for those who had earned their years. An elderly man entered, slow, deliberate. His steps, though hesitant, carried a quiet dignity. The soft shuffle of his shoes against the polished wooden floor echoed throughout the room. The bailiff, a young man with a professional air, watched him closely, his face softening at the sight. There was no rush, no expectation of swiftness here. Everyone understood. The man, dressed in a well-worn suit that looked too large for his shrinking frame, reached the defendant's stand. He paused, taking a moment to survey the courtroom. His weathered eyes met the gaze of Judge Caprio, who, despite his usual composed demeanor, felt a tug at his heart. The judge adjusted his glasses, focusing on the frail figure before him. There was an unspoken respect in the air, one that filled the space between the judge and the elderly man, as though time itself had slowed in the room, allowing everyone to recognize that this was no ordinary day. "Proceed," Judge Caprio's voice was steady, yet carried a subtle warmth. The elderly man nodded faintly, as if steeling himself for the words that would soon leave his lips. The case before the court seemed small, a forgotten fine, a parking ticket long unpaid. It was trivial in the grand scheme of things, but to the elderly man, it was one more reminder of a life that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. As the judge leaned forward, his gaze softened, the usual detachment of the courtroom replaced by a subtle compassion. The elderly man's voice trembled as he attempted to explain. I don't recall getting it," he said, a quiet sorrow in his words. "I never even knew about the ticket." There was no defiance in his tone, no attempt to fight the charge, just a sense of confusion, as if the world had moved on without him, and he was simply trying to catch up. Judge Caprio's voice was gentle, patient. "Can you tell me why you didn't pay the fine, sir?" The man shuffled in place, his shoulders sagging with the weight of age and the reality of his situation. He looked down, his hands shaking as they rested on the wooden table in front of him. "I don't remember," he murmured almost apologetically. "Maybe I didn't, or maybe I just couldn't. Things, they don't stick the way they used to." The room held its breath. The usual courtroom murmurings were absent, the air thick with understanding. There were no immediate answers, only the sadness of a man who had lost more than his memory. The elderly man seemed to shrink in the stillness of the room, his voice growing quieter with each word. "You see, my wife—" He paused, eyes brimming with something more than regret. "She passed away a year ago." The words hung in the air, heavy with the burden of loss. The judge, who had heard countless cases over the years, suddenly found himself unable to speak. The room, too, was frozen, caught in the rawness of the moment. The elderly man continued, his voice trembling. "I just miss her so much. Every day. My memory, it's not what it used to be. She used to remind me of everything. But now, it's just me." His hand rested on the side of the defendant's stand, trembling slightly as he held himself together. The audience, many of whom had seen far more dramatic cases, now found themselves struck by something far more profound. A life of loss, of fading memories, and of a man simply trying to survive in a world that had moved on without him. The judge lowered his gaze, his usual neutrality replaced by something deeper, a quiet understanding. "I'm sorry," the elderly man whispered. "I didn't mean to waste your time." The courtroom was silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone like a blanket. Judge Caprio took a long moment to gather his thoughts, the weight of the situation not lost on him. He cleared his throat, trying to steady the emotional tide that threatened to overwhelm him. "No, sir," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've not wasted anyone's time." He looked directly at the elderly man, his eyes filled with compassion. "I understand, more than you know." There was a pause as the room held its breath once more. Judge Caprio's voice grew firmer, but the kindness still lingered. "I waive the fine," he said, his voice steady but soft. "You won't pay this. It's dismissed." The elderly man blinked as though he hadn't fully processed what had just been said. I, I don't understand. Judge Caprio smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. You don't need to. Just take care of yourself. That's all that matters right now. The elderly man's eyes welled with tears, but he did not speak. He simply nodded, deeply moved. As he slowly turned to leave the stand, his steps were a little lighter, his burden just a little bit less heavy. As the elderly man exited the courtroom, the room remained still, the gravity of the moment lingering in the air. The narrator's voice echoed softly, filling the silence. A society that honors its elders honors itself. The words hung in the air, not as a mere observation, but as a call to action, a reminder that kindness and compassion should be the foundation of justice. Judge Caprio's tears were not a sign of weakness, but of a deep human understanding. In a world that often values efficiency and progress, this was a moment of quiet reflection on what truly mattered: dignity, love, and the recognition of each individual's humanity. The elderly man had walked in burdened by the weight of his years, but he left with a lighter heart, knowing that someone had seen him, truly seen him. And sometimes that's all a person needs, not to be judged, but to be understood. This story is a reminder that we are all part of a greater community, and that compassion is the bedrock of true justice. It's easy to dismiss the elderly, to overlook the slow march of time, but in doing so, we miss the opportunity to show them the respect and care they deserve. If this story moved you, leave a comment and share your thoughts on how compassion shapes the justice system. Subscribe for more stories where real justice meets real humanity.